I think for the benefit of the meeting and a few new representatives, we'll just go around and introduce ourselves. First, obviously Tim Madrick, I'm the Acting Chief in the absence of Dave Jones, who's still in South Yorkshire.
I'm Simon Dennis, I'm the Acting Chief Executive. Simon Dennis, Acting Chief Executive and Monitoring Officer, in place of the PCC, who's unable to be at the meeting today.
Jane Palmer, I'm the Chief Constable's Chief Finance Officer.
Will Naylor, the Police and Crime Commissioner's Chief of Staff.
Mike Stubbs, Chair of North Yorkshire Police Federation.
Leanne McConnell, Head of Criminal Justice.
Lisa Winwood, Assistant Chief Constable for Local Policing.
Maria Ells, Temporary Head of Organisation Development.
I'm Paul Kennedy, Acting Deputy.
I'm Amanda Oliver, Acting ACC.
And I'm Yvonne Taylor, Staff Officer to Mr Madrick.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'll take the first few items, then I'll hand over to Simon for items 4 to 6 to start off with. So we've got the minutes of the previous meeting of the 26th of April for those who are here. So just for accuracy, and then we'll go on to actions. Page 1, page 2, and then page 3. We're all okay with those, and I think there's some items which are on the agenda which will be covered, and then we'll move on to the actions. Okay with that? Okay. Thank you. Then moving on to the actions. The first one that's still open is 116 in relation to Thrive and issues in relation to that. Paul, can I hand?
Yeah, Chair, there's an update as it appears on the action. The work's been progressed by Jenny Newbury. I guess the only point to add to that is that the work on Thrive has been expanded outside the force control room to a wider development piece across the wider organisation.
Thank you. And I know we've recently been inspected by HMIC, and they've commented on the initial work that's been done on Thrive and the fact that they look forward to it being embedded right across the organisation, which is a fair comment. Thank you for that. Then moving on to 120 to 123, there's updates there. Is there anyone able to give any sort of updates? Will, can you give any across there, please?
I can't. On 120 specifically, I know the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners are reviewing the way they group all their thematic issues, and so I wonder if a slowdown in getting some information back on the Concordat might be to do with this review they're doing. And so, and obviously a lot of change in commissioners nationally means lots of people who had area responsibility are no longer here, so that might be some reason for some of the delay.
I'm conscious that there is a document going around at the moment in relation to the Mental Health Gold Concordat for an election of a chair, and the terms of reference related to that, which I think is there's encouragement for submissions, I think, by the 7th of July, and Inspector Bill Scott's going to fill out our template in relation to that. Just an item under 123, we're still waiting a national decision in relation to the software issue, so until we get that, there won't be any further update. 124, performance. I think there's an update there in relation to rural crime analyst who will be dealing with that. Amanda, have you any further comment? I know you're down, it's down to the OPCC, but is there anything else in relation to the rural crime analyst that you want to pick up?
The analysts in post, they're receiving training and they've already started work on that piece of work and wider.
Okay, so if we can...
That's okay. In relation to 122 and 124, actually, we'll feed it back in with the National Crime Network have just had a report back from Plymouth University about sort of cost of rural policing and sort of looking at funding formula, but sort of looking at implicit cost, which might help generally in North Yorkshire because of our rural makeup, but refers back to 122 as well, and that work's now being completed, so that action could probably be closed. But we'll share that with everyone once it's sort of confirmed. But we're just working through it at the moment with Plymouth University.
And then moving down, the cluster under inspection activity, and Maria, you an update for those?
Yes, I've got a report on the agenda to go through later on, just giving an overview of the inspection activity and how that's conducted across the organisation.
Thank you. So we can close those items. Then further down, 131, better case management. Leanne?
Will and I have discussed this, and if there are any concerns or issues that are raised in relation to this area of business, we'll liaise and feed that into any continuous improvement process. So I think that can be closed.
Thank you very much. And of course, we'll pick that up through the local criminal justice board as well, if there are any issues.
Yeah, there will be formal reporting through that as well.
133, police ICT company, and over to you, Paul, please.
Chair, there's been significant engagement with the police ICT company over the recent weeks, just to assist us in providing some resilience around our ICT department. It's fair to say there's significant demand being placed upon our IT resources, so we're working with the ICT company to look at how we can bring in additional resources to meet that demand.
Thank you, and appreciate the work that's gone on with a number of colleagues to get that into the position we are in today. Then moving down to the grouping under 135 to 137, I know, again, Paul, we've made some approaches in relation to representation for VAT, and I know, Lisa, you're picking up some of those issues as well. Is there anything to add to that?
Nothing to add. Lisa and I had a recent discussion about that, and there's no concerns of recently in terms of the way the VAT is working. I think it's fair to say, but it's something which Lisa is now leading on. We'll continue to monitor. And
then again, moving down in terms of breakdown of force issues in terms of performance, the impact of cross-border crime, and then the issue of rural crime again. So again, do you want to pick that up?
I can, but nothing to add other than the update as it appears there's that common statistic that you see there in relation to that, the impact of cross-border crime, but the proportion of detected crimes committed by people from outside the county is quoted there. There's nothing further to add other than that, Chief.
Thank you. And then just going down the remainder of the items we've got there, I think we can close the 141 under inspection activity because that's actually been completed. And again, we await the formal report from HMIC, albeit we'll act upon the informal findings of the hot debrief, and that's been circulated. The planning items, forward planner, we've picked up again already, so that item can be closed. And the final thematic then, which came under protecting vulnerable people, there was an item there for myself in relation to civil orders. We have some statistics in relation to those, but I've been asked if Jane Wintermeyer, she's on leave at the moment, can come and talk through those at the next executive board, the executive performance meeting. Just a headline really. I mean, already in the last year, we've had nearly 80 domestic violence protection orders. Now that's clearly, you can work it out for yourself, it's 1.5 a week. Some of these happen, some of these happen at the weekend, some of them happen during the week. Obviously, we'd try and plan them from Monday to Friday. But that's quite a demand, and I think Jane wants to talk through the impact of that and how we respond to that as a service. Clearly an area of key vulnerability for those victims. And the rest of the items link into responsibility for Jenny Newbury under the OPCC's office. The only thing I'd again refer to is she's working very hard to make sure the right resources are in place for victims of sexual offences, and with the ongoing work with mental health, with the mental health work in the FCR, seems on a weekly basis to be bearing fruit in terms of the level of service provided and the avoidance of taking people into custody or elsewhere, quite frankly, under mental health issues. Is there any other comments that colleagues wish to make under the actions that we've missed? No. Item 2 closed. Forward planner under item 3.
Yeah, we're following the thematic updates has been previously agreed, which follows the priorities in the police and crime plan, with additional items being included as and when required. So at the next meeting, as well as the focus on prevention and early intervention, we're bringing an update on vulnerability resourcing and an overview of the force management statements and a lessons learned on the Athena House project.
Thank you. Are there any other issues for those as such? We're all aware that we've got those coming up. That's the 26th of July for the next thematic proposal. Right, item 4 brings us on to questions from the public. Are we in? And then I'll hand over to you, Sam. Have a question, so I'll hand over to you, Sam.
So yes, there's been one question submitted in advance of the meeting by a member of the public, and it's displayed on the screen. I'll read it out. It's why is the Police and Crime Commissioner not holding the Chief Constable to account over persistent, deliberate and unlawful data/information breaches? So just in relation to that, as colleagues in the room will know, but the public may not, Civil Disclosure Service Corporate Legal Services Department. As the PCC's General Delegate and Chief Executive, I've discussed that whole area with the Chief Constable this morning and with senior colleagues in the Executive Board that immediately preceded this meeting. There has been a recent review of procedures that took place with the assistance of the National Police FOI and Data Protection Unit. An action plan arising from that review will be considered by the Force Command team and thereafter by the Executive Board with a view to streamlining and improving compliance processes. Chief, I don't know whether you'd want to comment any further in relation to that particular matter.
Only that we would clearly look to make any improvements as quickly as possible, because our desire and ambition is to meet the various demands of the Freedom of Information Act, and actually, wherever possible, go beyond that and provide the background and explanation to the inquiries. And we will seek to continue to publish as much information proactively as possible, so to avoid duplicate questions coming in the future. Right. Item 5 then, we're moving on to the thematics, and I'll again hand over to yourself in a moment, but I think this is the slot for ACC Lisa Winwood, who's got responsibility in this area. Thank you. Lisa.
Okay, good afternoon. Mindful of using basic language rather than the acronyms, please remind me if I say something that it's obviously doesn't make sense, mindful of the general public will be watching. So priority 2 for us, cut crime and antisocial behaviour. This area of business is a key priority in delivering the police and crime plan of be safe and feel safe, and also being the most responsive service. The presentation will cover 2 elements. It's going to cover the progress in key areas against this priority, but because it's so closely linked to the performance data, the second part of this presentation will also incorporate the performance agenda item. So looking at the first slide, considering this area of business, there were a set of outcomes set out within the police and crime plan against this priority, generally criminality within the communities and working together, using enablers such as technology and our connections and engagement with the community to achieve those outcomes. So what the first part of the presentation will focus on is the third element down on that slide of our key areas of progress. I'm really mindful that a lot of these areas of progress cross-cut other people's areas of business, who are here at the meeting. So I would obviously welcome any inputs from people if it's their specific area of business or people have got any questions about those specific key areas of progress. This priority has obviously been to this meeting previously, but it was several months ago, and there's been quite a lot of progress in some new areas of business. So please forgive me, I'm mindful of people around the table might already know a lot of the information because they've been involved in monthly performance meetings, and I'm aware that you know this information, but obviously for the fullness of, since we last reported on this area of business, a lot has taken place to give a full picture for those that are not cited. So in the first part of this presentation then, the key areas of progress, citizens in policing, the Chief Constable is the national lead for citizens in policing. Mike Maiden, who is our Assistant Chief Officer volunteer, has undertaken some work both nationally and locally to deliver a more structured approach to citizens in policing. As an organisation, we have always had volunteers for several years, working in lots of different areas of our business, but under a fairly loose structure in terms of line management and assessment of key areas of business that they're involved in, and how we actually link the work and the value that those citizens in policing in their widest sense can bring to delivering a policing service. So that work's underway. I believe there's been a recruitment exercise to bring into the organisation a specific coordinator so that we can then structure and align the citizens in policing work to the deliverable outcomes against the police and crime plan, and also link them in with specific pieces of work where they can add value to the community. Moving on from there, we've progressed our rural crime area of business. There's now a rural crime task force in place, I think since we last met, who are a specific and dedicated team of staff who are working closely on cross-border criminality, working out there with neighbourhood policing teams in the community, using intelligence and information to target their activities to support some of those areas that came out within the crime survey for rural communities, and specifically focusing on those areas that matter to those people within those rural areas that sometimes feel exposed, that want to see greater visibility of policing, but actually targeting those specific areas of criminality. Linked to that, which actually isn't on here yet, is we've just taken the national lead for wildlife crime also, and a big focus, national focus on that area of business that's just in its infancy in terms of us taking over that portfolio, which Amanda is leading on behalf of the Chief. A big piece of work. So that's more to come on that, and probably we'll have a lot more to update on that at the next time this priority comes to this meeting on progress on that. Our Evolve area of business is our collaboration work stream with Durham and Cleveland, progressing now through to a shared dog section that's coming to fruition, and also some further work is taking place on specialist operations in that area of business, which I think we've previously discussed at this meeting, and there are plans moving forward for other areas such as major crime, which are also being progressed. That allows us to deliver a much wider area of business, aligning resources across several forces and using the skills and training across those forces to deliver a service to the local communities. Nexus has been progressed. To explain what Nexus is, it's a department that's been set up, again, since this priority was last reported here at this meeting. And Nexus is a collaborated team of people who are doing 3 key work streams. So in those key 3 work streams, there is demand and productivity being looked at, again linked to ensuring that we're delivering a service to the community of what is our future demand, what do we think are the areas that are going to cause safety issues to the community, and can we predict those demands, and are we using our resources in a productive way to deliver that service to the community. So the unit's looking at that, and the individual engaged with that piece of work is also on a national working group looking at productivity and demand. So we're also gaining a lot of research input and work from national strands of business there. The other area of business covered in there is our inspection and service improvement. So we're doing some local internal inspection work alongside the external inspections that take place from HMIC. So that unit is bringing together our own scrutiny of our own business and taking on board feedback of where we could improve our areas of business. And I'll come on to that a little bit later in the performance elements. For example, when we've undertaken a domestic violence piece of work recently. And the third strand of Nexus is looking at our intelligence analysis and how we can streamline and work more closely in partnership to analyse what's going on out there in our communities so that we can align our resources to achieve some of the outcomes that are described here in this priority in the Police and Crime Plan. Of course, a key area of business is if our staff are not trained in the right places at the right times and fit and well to deliver a service, we won't deliver some of these outcomes and key deliverables to the community. So there's an entire piece of work ongoing on the wellbeing agenda. Our Human Resources Department have undertaken external research that's tested and accredited and brought that research into the organisation, and we're running through a programme of work where line managers are trained to deal with wellbeing issues in the organisation, be more connected with staff sickness management, to provide support to staff in the relevant circumstances, and looking at our staff understanding their own, reflecting on their own performance, and therefore being able to deliver and amend the service that they give to the community.
Could I just pause there for a moment, Lisa? Very good. Just in relation to the wellbeing agenda, it's clear from Rosie Holmes, the head of HR, that there will be various fitness wellbeing events started and launched in August. They will be launched in August, but they'll be continuing through the autumn, as we discussed yesterday, which is really key because there were some concerns initially that August might not be the best month in the year to launch that. That's just the starting process, which we welcome. Interesting enough, last week I also attended the Police Treatment Centre, their annual general meeting, and the investment in the Police Treatment Centre by individuals but by organisations as well is extremely important, because they've devised, linked to wellbeing, areas of expertise in terms of mental health and stress and anxiety issues, which I think is a centre of excellence in terms of that. What they are recognising is the demand is there because of the stresses and anxieties and issues that officers and staff are facing. And we as a force should make best use of that, because it's literally not just on our doorstep, it's in the middle of our doorstep, quite frankly, at Harrogate. I know staff who've already attended, and they've actually recognised the quality of the work done. So I suppose the plea is to try and encourage people, if they're not to be members of the Police Treatment Centre. It has extended actually their coverage to people who are on the front line of policing services, so PCSOs and detention officers, which is welcome, because those colleagues also face some of the issues that officers have faced. So it's stopped there, because there are a number of things going on in relation to wellbeing, but we need to see that progress, and evidence and feedback to the staff and officers. What's been done to date and how we intend to take it forward. It's just our commitment going forward.
Thank you, sir. And I think it's really important that we also are looking inside the organisation to our own staff, because a lot of the cut crime and antisocial behaviour priorities and enablers are linked to outward-facing community contact, and if we don't support our staff, they won't be there to deliver the service. So it really has been a key piece of work. Although it might be difficult to make the initial link to this priority, actually it's a really important link to this priority. So another key area of business to cutting crime and antisocial behaviour has been the rollout of Thrive. We've heard a little bit about that in the actions updates earlier today, that it was predominantly rolled out within the control room function initially, and has been assessed within that function. And there's a lot of feedback work that's been undertaken with the public who have received a service on the back of Thrive being implemented. So just to explain, for those who've not been engaged in the Thrive work before, it's a way of assessing threats and risks to the public, what harm could be caused, whether there's an investigation that needs to take place, the vulnerability of the person, and also an engagement opportunity with the community. So that's what the mnemonic stands for in terms of Thrive. So the control room staff have been trained and using that in the past couple of years now, with an assessment process and feedback attached to it. On the back of that, it's now being rolled out more widely across the organisation, again, so that those staff who are out serving the public in the community are using Thrive as a way and a means of delivering a better service out to the communities based on threat and harm and risk, investigation and engagement with those members of the public, and most importantly, vulnerability of those members of the public that we come into contact with on a daily basis. So that's just in its infancy in terms of being rolled out by Superintendent Mike Walker, who has personally been spending the last couple of weeks in between his day job physically going out and briefing inspectors and sergeants on Thrive and its use, and the focus on vulnerability has been very much there of the V in the Thrive mnemonic. In terms of modes, the black boxes have been fitted to our vehicles across the fleet. This is an enabler that will allow us, when we get the data back from those systems, to tell where our officers have been on a minute-by-minute, hour-by-hour basis. We can then link that in with the analysis of our performance. So are their patrols, for example, having a major impact on a particular crime pattern in an area? And we'll have the actual factual data from those location boxes. Whereas previously it would be self-reported taskings from officers of how long they'd spent in a street. By the end of the shift, it might be difficult for them to remember exactly when they were there and then match that up with when did the crimes happen or when did an issue of antisocial behaviour happen, for example. So it's a really key tool in us lining up analysis with where our patrols are taking place as one of the elements.
This isn't a particularly familiar area for me, so on that point, when would you expect to have meaningful amounts of data? Where will it go to be considered? What will be done with the data?
Okay, in respect of the data, to make it meaningful, the company who are analysing the data for us at the moment say they need 6 months' worth of full data, because as the boxes are rolled out, you're only getting partial data during that time, and to get a full picture, a full 6 months of boxes being fitted to every vehicle will give a much clearer, accurate picture of how often the vehicles are being used, where they're parked, where they're patrolling, etc. And we will ultimately have the ability to press a button under some form of, I'm not the most technically knowledgeable person on this, but I'm told we'll be able to press a button. Line managers, for example, a sergeant on a shift, will be able to draw down the data about, for the last 8 hours of patrol activity, what crime has taken place on their area versus where their officers have been on patrol. And is there a link up, or actually are there patterns emerging, etc. So that's one of the means in which it can be used to support us. It's also very useful in terms of working in partnership with the community, if they feel that there's a certain issue that we could address, and whether we want to test with that community whether the value of a patrol in that area is working for them or not. We can actually work with the community and use some of that data as reassurance when patrols have taken place. We hear a lot about visibility and that reassuring the public about feeling safe and being safe, particularly in rural communities. So we heard in the crime survey a lot from the rural community about visibility really impacting on how safe they felt out in those communities. And we didn't have the data to say, well, actually, you might have had your curtains shut watching television. There were officers on patrol in your village that evening. That we will have the ability to provide that reassurance in a more auditable way in future as a result of some of this data.
I think, to be clear, my expectation is that particularly the neighbourhood teams who have geographic ownership will have access to that data, and their responsibility is to share that data in a meaningful format. So it's not just a question of putting out en masse of data, but exactly the point you raise, that we don't expect the community out there monitoring exactly when they see police vehicles or don't see police vehicles. They want to know if they are there and over what period of time they're there, and particularly if it's overnight. We don't expect them to be monitoring that, but bear in mind the impact of cross-border criminality, the issues that we face, particularly to the west of the county. It's really important we put that information out there in a format that's meaningful for the public.
Thank you. So moving on to community safety hubs, again a subject that has been discussed in this forum previously. So there's a well-established community safety hub now in York that was closely followed by a hub in Selby. There was a multi-agency hub of sorts already in Scarborough running that's then been aligned through our partnership hub for a more corporate approach to community safety partnership working. And we're now rolling out further pilots, and in particular Hambleton-Richmondshire area that's in pilot at the moment. That has been assessed by the University of York, specifically the hub at York, was assessed with some feedback and an action plan that Phil Kane took forward out of that, which has informed and helped to inform the future hubs that are now coming and the pilot and the corporate approaches that we want to take with some elements, whereas other elements are more about real local delivery to those local communities and those issues that are affecting them most. So the York hub has developed from just antisocial behaviour into wider vulnerability and community issues, because they found through the survey work and through the analysis that they were the areas of business that we could work more closely with in partnership and still be effective, whereas some other communities will benefit more from a focus on antisocial behaviour if that's the hub's core piece of work. So that piece of work is progressing again and should provide a much more focused, joined up partnership approach to tackling antisocial behaviour in our communities, because we're finding, or had found, that several incidents of antisocial behaviour were being duplicated. So every different agency was receiving reports and not joining up the response to that, so that the person affected felt that every agency was involved in resolving that issue for them, but together rather than separately. So that's certainly come out of the research work, that there's a much more cohesive approach now to people in the community receiving a joined up service in partnership for those antisocial behaviour issues.
So, just going to stop you there again. Could be clear that our expectation is we're going to have community safety hubs which cover the entire area for North Yorkshire. I know there's some districts you obviously haven't mentioned, but we will be working with those districts to make sure we have a community safety hub for each of the areas in North Yorkshire. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so swiftly moving on to the final two areas of our progress against this priority area before we move into the performance element, and of course any questions or anything anyone wants to add before we move on. ANPR, I don't want to steal Mr Kennedy's thunder given it's his national portfolio. We lead nationally for ANPR. There's been a raft of work over the past 12 months in terms of delivery of this area of business, through to a review that's recently taken place, and that review has been reported at various performance meetings, so that we're able to connect a performance framework with the work of the ANPR hub and what it's actually delivering in terms of the key priorities of the police and crime plan, and in reducing crime, reducing antisocial behaviour, and tackling key criminals and criminality in the county. I don't know if Mr Kennedy wants to, given his expertise in this area.
Well, I guess in brief, we've had a threefold increase in the number of our ANPR cameras across the county. We've developed a ANPR hub that's linked to our force control room. So in simple terms, if we have a ping or a hit on the ANPR camera, it suggests there's a piece of intelligence that a vehicle of interest to us is at a certain location, we can deploy our own police officers' patrol cars to intercept that vehicle, and that's happening on a daily basis, several times a day, almost every day. So the actual benefit of ANPR we're seeing on a regular basis. In terms of the best use of ANPR, we've got to demonstrate that we make a maximum benefit about the investment in that technology. So through my national role, I've carried out a capacity and capability review of all police force across the country, so we know what works best across the country for ANPR, and we're utilising that best practice to use what works best here in North Yorkshire. So the technology is proven, it's effective, and on a day in, day out basis it's having a significant impact on keeping people safe in the county.
Just for those people who haven't heard it before, automated number plate recognition. I know the majority of people listening will have heard that. I think the other point is to make that linked in the investment in the safety camera vans with ANPR capability linked into that as well, because we know they play a part in not just reducing KSIs, which is part of the killed and serious injured presentation in a bit, but also have a key part to play in terms of some of the routes that they cover with that capability. So.
Thank you. And then serious and organised crime. On a regular basis, there is a reassessment of our organised crime groups for North Yorkshire, and there's also work that is undertaken as a region on serious and organised crime and the cross-border impacts on us. As you've heard, obviously we have a lot of cross-border crime in North Yorkshire, and some of the enablers to us tackling that are our rural task force out there on our borders and the work you've just heard in respect of ANPR, but also there's been some work linking in the work of more local community safety teams and organised criminality. So some of the hub work that you've heard about, so for example across at the coast in Scarborough, there's been a real focus on agencies dealing with the same people that are then linked to some of the serious criminality, and making those links and being able to look at the wider aspect of dealing with some of those issues in the community, rather than individual dedicated teams just focusing on a crime group. Actually, local community policing is now engaged with the impact that those crime groups are having on communities and how we can maybe tackle that criminality in a wider sense in partnership.
That when you look at the key areas of progress, there's a significant amount of progress. So there's no sense of us standing still in any areas. I think the interesting thing when you look at some of the themes about vulnerability, and you cover serious and organised crime right at the end there, is the vulnerability of people in this county who, through trading standards, through other work, are vulnerable to serious and organised crime teams, through postal scams, through other scams, who utilise technology to conduct those scams, not necessarily as cybercrime, but just utilise the technology to do it. But there is a constant demand there. So working in partnership with others, we need to, they're constantly changing the mode of targeting vulnerable victims, and we're only as good as trying to keep up to date at that or prevent that happening. So I think there's some real challenges around those. The other area which I wanted to comment on for this is we've created extra demand in one sense because the work that Amanda's got in relation to partnership working, looking in both directions, one to the north east and one to Yorkshire and Humberside. But for North Yorkshire, that is entirely the right thing to do, because actually we are a key link between the whole of the number 2 region for policing, which includes up to the Scottish border in Northumbria and down to the borders with Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire in the south. So it's a big area, but there's an awful lot of strategic policing requirement work in terms of partnership work that's covered off not just by Amanda but other colleagues who work in that area, and I think it is worth the investment from North Yorkshire Police perspective.
Just an observation, Chief, if I may. When we look at those areas of progress, clearly all linked to performance, I can't help but think about technology, and we discussed it in the actions and the police ICT company and the work we're doing with them. If you look at Evolve and the work around collaboration, the community safety hubs, MODES, which is the black box technology, mobile working, and ANPR, there's a strong technology link there. So I guess my point is that investment, which we are progressing in IT, is fundamentally important to making sure there's ongoing progress. IT and performance are clearly linked.
They are, and the reason why in our mid-term financial plan that we just discussed this morning is that we've got capital sums put aside to actually invest in those areas. The difficulty is we've just got to get the right time frame to be able to invest in those and make sure they're appropriate for the use particularly by the front line, in terms of being able to effectively target that. We recognise that's a challenge, and we've got some more to do in those areas, but I think collectively we're up for that. It's just working through that together. So we've got that. Yes,
I think yes, and I think, by the way, yes, I think both those remarks are absolutely right, and I think with the Commissioner here should agree with them entirely. So thank you.
Okay, moving on. Just to check back before we move on from this slide, there's some of the areas that we've just talked about in key areas of progress, then linking back to the deliverables in the red boxes. There's a lot of connection across there with the community work, the technology that's just been mentioned, dismantling of organised criminality, and working closely with partners and communities against some of those key deliverables that are identified there in the police and crime plan under this priority. So moving on to outcomes, so delivering all of those areas of progress and enablers, and what performance measures are we using to then assess whether the outcomes are being achieved and that we are reducing crime and antisocial behaviour out in the community and making people actually feel safer. We'll move on to the performance areas under the performance measures. This also links in with the paperwork you've got in your packs on the traditional performance reporting here, which is done by exception. So there's a little bit of crossover with some of the documentation in the actual reporting period performance document in your pack and some of the elements on these slides. So there's a monthly performance meeting, an operations delivery board that examines in more detail areas of business, and a tactical tasking process that takes place both at force level and locally for areas of business to be identified that are key priorities for those local communities, and then force priorities in some of those wider areas that the force needs to focus on. And when we have those force level operational delivery board meetings, these are the areas of business that are examined in more detail that we're going to work through by exception today in respect of our performance. So looking at this slide on management grip, there is a site on our intranet that displays all of the information, management information that's been developed right down to individual officers are now able to look up exactly some of the data that you see here, which is at force level, but their individual line managers and individuals can be tested against actually how many of these live crimes are held against PCX on a particular team, so that we can drill down into that level of detail. But when they're aggregated up at a force level, this is what the current reporting period looks like. As you can see, there's a stable trend across some of those areas of business. So by exception, the area that obviously in this reporting period that we want to focus on is our compliance, which is an increasing trend. This has been discussed at detail at the Operational Delivery Board meeting to try and get underneath the reasons for 24-hour compliance breaches. So just to explain a little bit to people who are not familiar with the concept, that the National Crime Recording Standard requires us now to record a crime within 24 hours of it being reported, and this is implying that in this reporting period we've got an increasing trend of not meeting that requirement. Detailed work has been undertaken, and there are complex reasons for the numbers as opposed to one reason. Some of the reason is officers are going to jobs and they are not criming within 24 hours is the obvious answer, which is being tackled at daily management meetings on a daily basis. So the commanders that come to those performance meetings have daily management meetings on their areas, and they are focused on which crimes are outstanding on their areas within that 24-hour period that have not been crimed. The impact on the community is that one may not be receiving a service when a crime's reported if it's not put onto our systems immediately, but more importantly, we're not identifying vulnerability potentially, and we're not offering the victim support that those individuals need. So it is a real key focus for us as an increasing trend, and work is ongoing with commanders on a daily basis to identify that. However, that's not the full picture, and we found through examination that some of it is administrative. So Niche, which is our core record management system, requires certain boxes to be ticked for it to then count as being fully registered. And sometimes there are areas where a box is not ticked, that the crime is actually crimed, the officer's done what they're supposed to have done, services have been put in place, the officer's been and offered a service to the victim or the witness who's reported that incident. But when you push the button on the computer, it doesn't say that crime's been recorded because the crime recording unit are waiting for a box to be ticked or an administrative piece of work to be done. So I'd like to offer some reassurance, I think, that in these cases, not all of those increasing trend numbers are people who haven't received a service yet. There are some cases where there's an administrative reason for it.
What I'd like to understand is which of those areas, how much of that is in potentially high-risk areas? You mentioned the service to victims who have been subject to domestic violence incidents. It's, albeit that we've learnt for the consistently high service across the area, what I want to know is what's the day-to-day issue in terms of high-risk areas, which I'd include domestic violence in?
In that respect, every single crime report is listed. So every crime that's come into us on a log, that when you press the button it says this isn't actually recorded as a crime yet, is a proper list at the daily management meeting, so the commander or the deputy commander of that area or the local inspector physically can see what type of job it is, who the victim is, any vulnerability issues, and that's why it's done on a daily basis, that actually this hasn't been crimed. It can be actioned at that point in time to check, is this an administrative issue, or actually we need to get somebody to that victim and deal with that incident.
So you're saying logically then that any high-risk areas that have not received that level of service within 24 hours will be picked up? I'm not saying that's acceptable, because actually we should deal with high-risk matters more quickly than that. But the fallback position would be that if there were any gaps, we would pick those up at the next daily management meeting, just for the benefit of the public.
I think in reality, the check and balance is just the audit of the crime report going on, as opposed to the victim receiving the service. So a victim that's high risk would be picked up in the control room of the storm logs there. We need to send somebody to it. The compliance against 24 hours is the follow-up. So in reality, it's a check and balance of, actually, haven't we picked that up in the control room? And I would argue on 99.9% of the time, it's being dealt with in the control room. The crime report's not on, and it's used as a check and balance. But at least we've got that element. It's still not good enough that it's not on in 24 hours, but there are complex reasons for that are being explored at our Ops Delivery Board.
I just wanted, the only reason I wanted to tease it out was because people listening might assume that we're missing a number of these. I agree, it is largely administrative. The reassurance I was seeking was what you came to at the end, which was the vast majority of these are being picked up and a service provided. We just need a fail-safe mechanism to make sure that's actually the case. And actually, if the odd occasion has been missed because something's happened, and then the colleagues are picking that up at other meetings, and at the very latest, the next day at the 9 or 10 o'clock meeting.
Just to ask sorry, but this might be a clumsy question, but is the tolerance level for 24-hour compliance breach 0? Or, so in other words, is 74 a lot?
At the performance meeting, they're broken down into areas. So there's specific numbers for Scarborough, Rydale, York, etc. I would prefer it to be 0 in terms of that. It should be 0. Everything should be crimed within 24 hours. But I think there's an acceptance that actually, if the person's received all the service they needed to receive, there's an admin box that hasn't been ticked, and therefore it doesn't display as a crime. There is a tolerance level from an administrative perspective. There is no tolerance level for us not actually delivering the service.
Mike?
So I think when it's been looked at as well, some of these where the crime hasn't been submitted, it's not because no action's been taken, it's actually because a lot of action's been taken, and the victim has been seen and dealt with, the offender has been arrested, and a whole boatload of actions have taken place, but actually the physical crime hasn't been submitted.
As you rightly allude to, it behind the question is, that's the most important thing, the quality of service. And from a victim perspective, they've benefited from the service provided. Clearly, we just need, bear in mind, we record 100, sometimes 100, 110 crimes a day. We need to make sure as we go through that, none do slip through the net, because, as I say, our tolerance is to provide, or we don't have a tolerance, our aim is to provide the most responsive service we can to those victims. I think it's a point well made, and that's what we're trying to reiterate here. Sometimes events just overtake officers, that we're not making excuses for them. That's the situation. The most important thing is the quality of service the victim gets.
Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next slide. This is demand by exception. So the blue squares on this slide show a crime type and a geographical area that over a 3-month period has shown a demand that's higher than the normal demand. And the point that our performance team would make in some of these cases, that actually an increase in reporting is a positive indicator that there's public trust to report incidents that maybe they wouldn't have reported before. Just again to point out the exceptions on this particular slide, which is a common theme as we go through the performance, is the continuing trend for us of violence without injury is on the increase, cycle theft, and the reporting of sexual offences. A lot of work has been done around these areas by the performance team, linked to, and again we'll come on to it later, violence without injury is linked to a greater recording of harassment incidents and a change in the way harassment has been dealt with. Cycle theft is a specific, always has been a specific area of focus for the City of York, but Harrogate have seen a recent increase in that trend further on in the performance reports, and sexual offences across the board really for us, but again that's seen as a positive, that people are more engaged with the service and willing to report, and again a lot of detailed work was done over several months and has been reported through this meeting over several months, that it isn't an actual rise in sexual offences but a reporting issue, and in some cases a non-recent reporting issue. So an offence has occurred at a previous time in history and the person then comes forward to report because of some of the media coverage and other inquiries that are going on nationally.
Just to explain then, Lisa, the non-recent, if you just go into just describe what non-recent is in terms of policing terms, because it's it may be a little bit confusing to people.
Yeah, so in terms of, and it's sometimes phrased historical, but in some more recent inquiries we've tried to address the fact, what does historical mean? So if members of the public at the time of the incident occurring don't feel that they either want to report it, have got the confidence to report it, or there's another reason personally why, it may be that some months or even years later somebody would come forward to the police, and in the cases of this rise sometimes it's years. So a lot of detailed work has gone on in the background of the performance team. Are we actually concerned about the rise in the number of sexual offences occurring in the last 24 hours? And the answer is no. Their examination has been that people have reported, and when you look at the date the incident happened, it is at some point in the past rather than a recent offence. The average number of days it's taking us to detect those offences within our systems. Further work's needed on this in terms, again, it's back to some of the similar conversation we've had earlier about administration reasons for that happening versus the actual length of an investigation, because we know through the implementation of investigation hubs in the last 12 months that we've actually reduced the amount of time it takes from a point of investigation to somebody dealing with it because of the nature of the investigation hubs and the way they work. So there needs to be a lot more work in respect of this particular slide. The Ops Delivery Board was chaired by Amanda a couple of weeks ago, so forgive me if there's been some further conversation about this, but certainly further work needs to be done because the live data from investigation hubs doesn't reflect some of the results that are on here. Again, it's back to the reality for the victim versus what's going on paper.
I think that's my key point really. I'd want to see from a victim's perspective, because we talk about to detect crime to point of charging or other issues. For me, that from a victim's perspective, it's when that case is concluded either at court through a guilty plea or not guilty plea, and because that often is the sort of the difficulty that victims have. And I know some of those are outside our control, but then we can take it into local criminal justice board challenge. And so we need to know what that trend is, and then we need to build that up over time. Because I think if you asked a victim, they'd like to know the offender's been charged. What they really, really like to know is, has that matter been concluded at court, and do they have to attend as a victim, as a witness at court, or when's that going to be scheduled if they're going to have to attend? Those are the things I think that most matter to victims, as opposed to which date we charge them. Which I know why you're doing that, but I think it's how we present that in future.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, and I think the areas that we're focusing on in terms of some of the transforming the criminal justice processes through both the magistrates and the Crown Court areas, very much focus on that speed of justice, that effective and efficiency as well. And that is measured and monitored through the Criminal Justice Board, and very much a partnership approach once it gets into that arena as well. But that end-to-end from our side of it until it gets is vital to tell that whole picture, really. And we're doing okay, actually, on early guilty pleas.
Okay, so mindful of time, swiftly moving on onto the antisocial behaviour slide by district. As you'll see, there are some red areas on here, but I'm reassured by Stephen Murray and our performance team that when you look at the overall trend in antisocial behaviour, it's actually in line with last year. There are individual problem-solving plans in place in these local areas where you see that there's been an impact. And as we talked earlier about the introduction of the antisocial behaviour hubs, so there are pockets when you do year-to-date comparisons, but when you look more closely at individual ASB matters or antisocial behaviour matters, the overall trend in performance is in line with last year's performance as a force at that level. And the antisocial behaviour hubs, when they've been, for example, the York Hub examined, are having an impact on that antisocial behaviour.
I just wondered if there's a similar reporting issue with ASB, if the hubs are working better and people are either encouraged to come forward, or issues that might have gone to, say, environmental health are being logged, you know, rightly maybe as a police issue, and then maybe they weren't before if there was some, you know, if there were some gaps and stuff. Is that, have we seen anything like that?
I'd have to go into a lot more detail with each of the hubs, if you like, to see whether that's certainly the most research has been done on the York Hub, having been established, and then an academic piece of research carried out. But certainly the engagement with the public and people's willingness, and also the reporting mechanisms of previous people would ring the council because it might be a noise-related issue or a local issue, and it wouldn't be recorded on our systems. And we were mindful when you join those two things up, and we're dealing with the holistic approach to antisocial behaviour, that we could always see that increase because of the joining up of council reported nuisance versus police and adding them together.
I think it's overall satisfaction with service. I think that's the key thing for us as agencies, and us to forget the boundaries we had before in terms of where we thought our territory ended and started, or started and ended. I think it's actually how communities feel about how responsive public sector service is to ASB, antisocial behaviour. I think that's the key judge of that particular issue, because in truth I don't think we have a huge amount of confidence in that baseline. And that's the difficulty. I think the baseline was, and it's frustrating because you'd really like empirically to be able to demonstrate that. But I think you have to go back to that community and talk to cohorts of the community and how they feel about it as the most accurate indicator we've probably got.
Okay, moving swiftly on to vulnerability. Just want to point out a key area of this part way down in terms of outcome rates for domestic abuse. And again, touching on where we spoke earlier about without injury increases in crime. An increase in injury without crime resolved linked to more common assaults and harassment charges in the last 2 months. But we've also looked at, when you see where it says arrest and VA and bail rates for domestic abuse, there's been a very specific piece of audit work by the Nexus team on domestic abuse. And we've looked more closely because, as you can see, the statistics here down from 70% in 2013 to the results you see on here in terms of arrests and bail rates. There's been a key piece of work to look at the investigation of domestic abuse. There's an action plan that's come out of that is being reported through a vulnerability board so that we can focus on the quality and standard and confidence in people to report that domestic abuse and the outcomes. There's also been a real sea change in the way we deal with domestic abuse, and there's been a focus from the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office on commissioning domestic violence services where people might feel confident to be given support by another agency, but they don't actually want the police to progress because at that moment in time it's not in their best interests for their domestic circumstances. So we're trying to ensure that it isn't a one-size-fits-all for domestic violence. There is a raft of support we can give to people that doesn't always necessarily lead to an arrest. So we think that might be some of the elements that are captured in there, but we have taken a very close look at this area of business through an audit process. Moving on to mental health, on the next slide. Again, there's some key work going on here with the York University project regarding the identification and flagging of occurrences because we believe from a performance perspective it's underrepresented. So somebody to explain that, when somebody rings up our control room, we're not convinced at this moment in time we're capturing every single occasion of when there is a mental health link to that particular incident. So we're not getting a full analytical picture of the issue. However, we ought to celebrate success here because there's been a huge amount of work in terms of support for mental health. There's been street triage in place now, which has been very successful in supporting people. And also we have triage mental health members of staff in the control room at first point of contact, supporting people who ring in to be directed to the right agencies.
In addition, we're going to work with the Yorkshire Ambulance Service as well to try and improve that level of service. They have mental health support in their force control rooms, and we're thinking of doing some work combining that to assess how we reactively respond to those calls as agencies, because often we will get duplicate calls or we'll be dealing with the same people, and it's the quality of those services through our commission triage service and the service they have within that. And to that end, we're pulling together a group of emergency responders, Yorkshire Ambulance Service and the Fire and Rescue Service, around how they do that across Yorkshire and Humberside. So the 4 Fire and Rescue Services, the 4 Police Services and Yorkshire Ambulance Service, to try and get best practice out of there, because some areas of work that Fire and Rescue do in South Yorkshire which are quite interesting in relation to mental health, which they've sort of taken primacy on, because they're also probably some of the highest risk for fire and other health issues in the home. Okay, so we'll just do the last bits by exception, Lisa.
Yeah, so in terms of case file quality, I'm sure Leanne could talk about this for hours. As you can see here, very briefly, we have had an improvement in the sufficient files, quality of files being submitted through to the CPS, again reported on a monthly basis, but there's been a lot of work with file quality training in the past 12 months, and we are starting to reap the benefits of that training in terms of the number of returns of files coming back to us for corrections.
So how confident are you in the process when we look across the range of investigators that case file quality will be commented on in their PDRs?
We're just reaching a point with the management grip site that we talked about earlier of having individual information about individual officers' case file quality. So can be graphically represented of that individual, how many returned files, for example, of them being performance managed for that. And certainly there needs to be, as you pointed out, a check across with the PDR objectives for those individuals and development plans if their file quality is not meeting the required standard.
Okay, I didn't mean just negatively, I mean positively as well. I mean, there are some officers who, despite the pressures of various other things, regularly produce high quality files, both in uniform and in detective specialisms. I'm interested why those officers manage to do that, and there's a difference in relation to some categories of officers who don't consistently manage to do that, even though they have the experience and training or have been given the training provided.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to give some reassurances around some of the development areas around case file quality. The case quality review team that we've put in place do actually actively bring supervision into the team and go through with them areas for both actually concern for development, but also ensure that they do feedback positive areas of work, so we can try to, if you like, disseminate that and spread the good practice in relation to those areas that we're seeing having an impact. There's a lot more to do. We've done an awful lot. we are undertaking in the autumn, well, in fact, it's pretty much about to start in terms of the introduction of some additional CPD days, which take us on the next sort of stage of the training for our officers that following on from last year. So there's a continuous programme of work, and during that, those inputs, the priority around performance for fire quality for officers is continually pushed as a priority. You know, I think it's about development, but it's also about sharing that good practice, and we do support the teams in that, and the management grip site, as Lisa has said, has got an awful lot more information on it now than it ever did before.
So the short answer is then 100%, either positive or negative, there will be a reference to their investigative standards. Thank you. Will?
Sorry, this might be a silly question. Is fully sufficient a good thing?
And as you're about to point out, that's gone down, but sufficient has gone up.
Yes.
Okay, we have quite high standards in terms of how we are measuring this data here is when it comes into the file quality review team in terms of before we pass it on to the Crown Prosecution Service. So if the case quality review team has to do no rework on that case, and we deem that it's satisfactory that it goes forward to the CPS, then that is deemed as fully satisfactory. If we have to do some further work, some remedial action at that point before we send it across to the CPS, then because we want to get it in a, you know, we do class it as sufficient because the defects may not be quite so bad as to put it into the completely insufficient category. Does that make sense? So it can be a bit confusing, but those at the time of deciding what those parameters were and the thresholds, it seemed to be the most simplistic way of trying to measure some of the effectiveness of that team. And it's fair to say that working with the performance team, that we have been working on what the metrics really should look like in relation to this, because this is a graph that's a new graph from previous months, and I think there may be some refining to do to make it a little bit clearer, and also to bring in some of the wider aspects around the Crown Court trial aspects, because this does focus largely on some of the summary type cases that we're looking at. So does that answer your question?
It does, but it looks like things are getting worse from that graph. Is that right? So sufficient has gone up, insufficient looks about the same, and fully sufficient has gone down.
Well, I suppose it's a matter of interpretation in terms of that, but the insufficient has gone down, and that's probably the main area that we need to concentrate on in terms of whether or not it would fail through the next stage of the process. So when you look at it on the face of it, I agree, it looks like it's going down, but when you look across sort of a trend, it's probably not quite right. So therefore, I think hence the reason why we're probably working on how we can present that in a more understandable way. Okay.
I think it's partly a presentation. Actually, it's very helpful, Will, because I thought I'd understood it first up, but now I realise I didn't.
Right.
So,
Okay.
I mean, it appears to me it's as much about presentation, really. I mean,
think,
roughly speaking, the insufficiency seems to say more or less the same across the course of the life of this graph. I see there are some variations, but it's difficult to tell what those actually are from the way it's presented. And if sufficient and fully sufficient are both essentially good things, but one's an improvement on the other, then we need to know what the statistical position is with insufficiency, don't we?
Yeah. I think there's further work to do, as you say, on that, yeah.
I think if we've already said that this, and the example is that there's about 20% is insufficient, give or take a few percent, we have some work to do. And bear in mind, we have still yet to find our long-term financial savings, and the gatekeeping role wasn't a permanent forever and a day. We realise it as a place, but we've got to do more to reduce that 20%, and the only way we're going to do that is to hold people to account, or on occasions provide the right time and training. There's a whole mixture of reasons there, and I know they're not all panaceas to immediate things. So I know there's quite a lot of work. Amanda's done a lot of work in some areas. Leanne's done work in other areas in relation to that. But we've got to squeeze that. We've got to squeeze that gap. however we use the criteria. And I think we'll come back to that when we next revisit this cycle, because we do expect to see some improvement, because the other areas are good or goodish or getting better. That area is not, if it sticks around 20%, we're not hitting the key people who are not producing, because I suspect we've got repeat people not reaching the standard. That's so we need to address that. We'll come back to it next. Can I just suggest you skip over Kilden Serious Injury, because that's going to be a substantive presentation.
Force control, and we've already talked about anyway. In terms of the trends on there's no real exceptions that the performance team have reported there. There's some work ongoing with an action plan linked to the 101 review undertaken by the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office, which will push obviously our performance in those areas in the right direction. And last but not least, on satisfaction, again, there's a stable trend across the board with no exceptions reported by the performance team. And we're still working on gaining those extra, through Thrive, increasing people's satisfaction with the service we receive. So we're not complacent about the stability. We still keep looking for opportunities to improve the service.
So, Lisa, thank you for the presentation. Very, very grateful. Just on because it probably comes more conveniently on the agenda now, and because not everybody watching the meeting will necessarily make it through to AOB, although of course we have to. I did ask the Chief just to make a brief statement about hate crime and the perception in the media and in the public of public concern around rises in that subsequent to the referendum, and I'll just hand over to the Chief for that purpose.
Yeah, I mean, there's been some worrying national stories in relation to hate crime, xenophobia, issues around minority communities, some of which have been long established in this country, and it is quite bluntly disgusting that they've been targeted post a referendum on Brexit. The issue, actually, I saw this morning from the National Police Chiefs Council, there's been a 67% increase. Now, I don't know how, they've obviously gone to various forces, or they might have gone to various specialist reporting lines for that. Needless to say, that's significant in the last few days. We're only talking about 5 days now, if you include today as well. We haven't seen an increase. In fact, we've done a check this morning, and we've, if anything, against our normal reporting process, it's been a slight decrease. So I wouldn't make any comment otherwise to the fact that we haven't seen the increase. What I've asked at command meeting yesterday was that the commanders, the local superintendents, chief inspectors keep very much in touch with their local communities around issues, look for any reports of any description, either through the partnership structure or direct reporting to us, and then work with our established communities where we have neighbourhood officers and link officers into those communities. I think particularly yesterday morning I commented on the long-established Polish community within the Selby district, because I think we need to give them reassurance, because they'll be picking up these messages through the national media, they'll be picking them up through their local networks, and our job, as Lisa alluded to earlier, is not just dealing with the crime, but it's dealing with the perceptions and fear of crime. So we need to make that extra effort to engage with and support those communities, and quite bluntly, from North Yorkshire Police's perspective, we will not tolerate those incidents of hate crime. We'll investigate them rigorously, we'll try and make sure we find who are the offenders, and we'll take them through the judicial process appropriately. I think that's all I particularly want to say at this moment, but we will we will work with all our partners, both local authorities and anybody else, to make sure we have no tolerance of hate issues as a result of what's happened last Friday, or longer term in effect.
Thanks, Tim. So, colleagues, any other questions or comments in relation to item 5, Lisa's presentation, or anything anybody else has said under item 5? In which case, thanks very much. That takes us to item 6, presenting officer, Chief Constable Tim Madrick and Leanne McConnell.
We've got a slightly... no, so you can go down there. The click can go down there. I'm only going to do the introduction and then hand over to Leanne and Yvonne to make other comment in relation to this. One of the reasons it's got my name against it is because I chair the 95 Alive Road Safety Partnership for North Yorkshire and the City of York. and been heavily involved nationally with the National Police Chiefs Council in relation to aspects of road safety, motorcycling, and commentary on other issues that link to priorities for our communities. What I would say is, from a road policing strategy, and I'll cover the first slide and then I'll hand over to Leanne, is that road policing matters to our community. They've said that for a number of years. They've also reiterated to the Police and Crime Commissioner, and when they've gone back in and actually surveyed that's come out loud and clear. The reason for that is actually everyone experiences our road network every day. They don't have to be a driver, they can be a pedestrian, a cyclist. Everyone uses the road network, and it's fundamental in how people conduct their lives. At the extreme end, clearly our specialists in road policing deal with the fatalities and very serious injuries, and they do that extremely professionally and are, I think, exemplars nationally in relation to the way they conduct themselves. And albeit that we've seen in the last year perhaps the lowest number of fatalities on our roads, there are a number of reasons behind that. There are some explanations that Leanne and Yvonne will go on to give for that. We're not claiming the total credit for reduction in numbers of people killed. There is some proactive work which leads us to believe we've had some factors on that, but there are other areas where, for example, health reaction to very serious accidents in the key golden hour of treatment can make a big difference of survival. What it does mean, though, is that actually those people live with very serious injuries, and actually the costs for the health sector, quite rightly, escalate quite markedly. So I'd just comment on those, and let's say there's no sense of celebration in relation to reducing figures, because if you talk to families who've lost people, they don't celebrate that fact either. What is self-evident is that we have had some impact. We've talked about the impact of ANPR, but we'll talk about road safety camerans and the Traffic Bureau. The plan and the strategy is being continually reassessed. There are some things that won't change. The fatal 4 factor nationally is well identified and documented through research. Speed, distraction, issues of drugs are there. You'll have seen my comments and other people's comments in relation to the summer campaign we're currently on with. We are missing a trick, because we've got more effective at targeting people, but there are more people out there committing serious road traffic offences linked to drinking and drugs, and they are a complete liability on our roads. We peaked over 100 arrests in the first 3 weeks. That's 100 people who could have been effectively responsible for killing somebody on our roads. That's quite a stark figure with some really startling issues, which I don't think we're fundamentally addressing nationally as yet, but I'll leave that to another day. I think our commitment is to work with the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office quite clearly, but with all our partners to reduce those figures even further. And to that end, we will, as I say, revisit and refresh the strategy from 95 Alive, working locally, and then more nationally about how we can impact on long-term prevention, long-term education, because this whole agenda in the next presentation is about how we make our roads safer. That's our key focus, how we make them more usable, safer, we encourage the right people to use them, and again, in other areas like cycling, we encourage that, because there's no doubt North Yorkshire, through the success of the Tour de France, through Tour de Yorkshire, through other programmes of work, has become a mecca for cyclists as well. We've always been a mecca for motorcyclists, we are now becoming a mecca for cyclists. And I think that's good news in one sense, but it just poses challenges in more vulnerable road users and others. So that's my introduction, Leanne, and if I've taken some of your other slides, so be it. But if we hand over to you for the rest of it, and I know Yvonne will chip in as a specialist in relation to some areas of operation.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so yes, the road policing strategy there, as Mr Madrick has outlined, is one of our number one priorities. And in informing that, we've had a considerable amount of community engagement and public feedback to assist us in that, which also leads us down the route of some focused activity in support of that. feedback throughout 2016 and 17. Actually, it's been an ongoing thing before that in terms of 2015, which I'll come on to going forward. Those focused areas of activity will form the main part of this presentation. They aren't the only areas of activity. It's obviously quite a complex arena in terms of contributory factors. However, I think hopefully the public will see, and that this room will see, that we're making good inroads into that as we go forward. So moving on to the next slide, due to the feedback that we have got and the evidence that we've gathered, we've wanted to sort of, if you like, corral our sort of skilled resources and educational options under one sort of governance structure in terms of a centralised traffic bureau. And that follows quite a long series of inputs through various pilots that we've had since 2011 up to the present day. So we've been really quite careful in terms of incremental progression with regards to this. It's fair to say the last year in particular has seen the Central Traffic Bureau created, and that is still developing as we speak, and I'll come on to that a bit further. But already the success of that Traffic Bureau, without being too complacent, but it has reached the recognition on an international stage as well as a national stage in terms of how we have looked to seek to employ technology and to restructure the skilled resource that we've got under this form, and that you'll see on the slide there quite a good jolly picture there of some of the team and other partners, because of our partnership working as well, accepting some international awards through the Prince Michael of Kent. And that was for effective use of our technology, which I'll come on to shortly, in terms of our camera equipment and 360 capability degrees, but also actually the vision around the Traffic Bureau concept. And that was deemed to be exceptional and worthy of recognition. And also we've had further partnership working recognition around innovation through the Chartered Highways Institute of Technology, and that essentially relates to some work with regards to HGV use in lane 2s through roadworks, and we'll be working with the Highways Agency and also Carillion. And that's had quite a significant influence on some of our, if you like, public and companies. So, for example, through analysing some of the data through the roadworks on the A1, certain companies have come to light as going into lane 2 where they shouldn't be, because of those restrictions, width and weight restrictions, and we've written as a partnership, a tripartite approach to those companies who have indicated that they will train and educate their staff in relation to their driving behaviour through those areas of work. So that's something that's not been tried before in the country. So that's obviously welcome work and welcome approach to the input that we've given. But the Traffic Bureau essentially consists of the functions that you see there on the PowerPoint. So it consists of the safety camera operations. It also consists of dedicated analytical function which helps us to inform our deployments, which I'll come on to shortly. It also incorporates and consolidated our central ticket functionality, and it's developing and will manage the Community Speedwatch initiative, and also we've brought into the fold the traffic management process, and I'll come on to those in the next slides. Okay, so starting with our, if you like, safety camera operation, it probably would be quite helpful to outline quite a short potted history and what our current capability is. So we, as I say, in the earlier introductions, we've been really careful in terms of making sure that this is what our communities want, and that it links in with the evidence and the intelligence that we've gathered. So we did actually start running a pilot back in 2011 now, which seems quite a long time ago. That pilot was successful, and that saw the expansion of the safety camera team up to, in 2013, up to 3 vans. And also then further up to 6 vans with additional capability in it, including ANPR capability, which will, again, I'll come on to a little bit later. The current fleet consists of 6 large safety camera vans, and I say large because I'll tell you where we're going forward, and we have currently a motorcycle as well in terms of that enforcement. That again is still under pilot, the motorcycle, but that's proving quite successful. But we have 6 vans that have significant capability in terms of visibility around community engagement, and the technology that is on board and the capability on board those vans. We had public surveys done in conjunction through with the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office when we were looking at expanding those that function, and the overwhelming feedback from the public from that engagement to strengthen the capability of the speeding enforcement was there. So 78% of participants were concerned about road safety, and 72% of those felt that more should be done. That essentially related to speed-related collisions, antisocial road use of the network, and speeding in local communities. In terms of responding further to the speeding in the local communities, we are in the process of increasing our capability further by another 6 vehicles, and they will be a different type of vehicle, a smaller vehicle, which has greater flexibility, and they will be in terms of its deployment and where they can be located, because you have to have a certain amount of hard standing to be able to locate these vehicles. And they will also be based in rural communities and local communities, and they will be strengthened or equipped with ANPR as well. So that helps with a number of areas in terms of our rural crime concerns and visibility and engagement. So that is due to come in we're working towards January. Hopefully we can get that in earlier, but we have quite a long procurement and vehicle conversion process, and also a significant recruitment process to be able to run the capability. So that is all underway currently. With the multiple areas across the force that are engaged in that in terms of estates and as I say, procurement, and we've also potentially got to look at procuring some additional type of equipment that will go in the van. So unfortunately I'd like to be able to get it in sooner, but I can't just go down to the local Bristol Street Motors, if you like, and buy some vehicles. It's got to go through a process. So So that's currently underway, but they will be located and directly deployed from rural locations. So, and they will be, we've identified those locations to be Skipton, Malton, Harrogate and Thirsk and Northallerton, as well as obviously the existing base, which will be in York, where the large vans will deploy from. And in addition to that, we are looking at our motorcycle capability. We've been undertaking a pilot around the motorcycle capability, and the community engagement and the feedback in relation to that is extremely positive, particularly as the individual is there in the community and is visible, and even members of the community have come out to the operators and have had really friendly discussions and exchanges with them. So in the short time we've been doing that, the public themselves from that perspective have indicated a significant road support in terms of addressing their local problems. So that's really positive. So we'll report through the Chief Officer team in the next few weeks, because we wanted to run that as a pilot for sort of 6 months. So there are some further opportunities there. So at the moment, it's an evolving picture, and it's been an evolving picture for quite a long time, but we've done it in quite a considered way based around the evidence and the feedback that we're getting. Okay. Just in terms of how we deploy, there's a lot of questions asked around, how do we deploy our current fleet? There's quite a large set of criteria and intelligence-based and national guidance that we apply to that. We have a dedicated analyst in our traffic bureau who is excellent and continuously reviewing the sites, and you probably can't see it on the map, but there's a map. I mean, well, you can see that there are literally loads of locations across North Yorkshire, and currently with the current capability of 6 vans, with the best will in the world, it's you're not going to be able to meet all of that requirement where our evidence show that we should deploy to. So hence another reason why we are obviously expanding the capability as well, so we can reach those wider communities. So nationally, we've got quite a stringent set of criteria that we apply in relation to sites, and in doing so, we need to make sure that any enforcement activity is if you like, is directly targeted or primarily at those whose behaviour pose the greatest risk and highest harm, obviously, but also identifiable locations and in particular identifiable circumstances. So, and in doing so, we need to make sure that we are being proportionate and that they're consistent and transparent, and those routes get published on a daily basis. John?
Sorry, you may be about to come on to this,
yep.
but just for the benefit of the public, obviously, not for my benefit.
Yep.
What does all that mean that's on the screen?
Right. Thank you.
I'm sure you're aware, but
that's
just help
fine.
me. I'm
Yes.
staring at it as you're speaking. I need to,
Right.
yeah.
No, that's absolutely fine. Okay, so those are the locations that we have identified as being areas that we can deploy to in terms of the locations where we will place our safety camera vehicles. And that is done on the basis of statistical analysis of various sets of collision data that we collate, and we work quite closely as well with the 95 Alive partnership. We obviously continuously assess and update those, and some of those are also based around national, if you like, sites around killed and seriously injured sites, so where we get the most collisions and injuries, and also sites of community concern. where the community have told us through a process that we have called a speed management protocol, where they have submitted areas for concern, and we have validated those areas as areas of concern. I can come into that in more detail, maybe as part of the Community Speed Watch input. So we also identify areas in terms of events or locations that could be popular routes. So we have motorcycle routes, for example, where we know that analysis has shown that there's a high, if you like, disproportionate number of motorcycle collisions or antisocial use of the road, so particularly during the peak periods in terms of summer months. So we identify motorcycle routes, casualty routes, and we also take a route approach with some of those deployments. So, you know, you might have somewhere, if you've got a number of sites across the A64, for example, you could have vans located along the site to make sure across a longer period of time, if you like, there's the behaviour driving period is addressed. So really we have all of the a whole set of matrix, if you like, that comes up with those routes. We do not randomly send vans. We cannot send our vans wherever we like. We have to have an evidence base in terms of where we actually put citing them. And there's quite a detailed process that we go through to determine that. I don't know if that helps in any way. You answer your question, but
can you go even more basic than that, please? What do the numbers mean in the boxes, and what do the colours mean? Just so that it is for my benefit, actually.
Right.
Just take the time to
okay, the colours. Okay, well, some of them are motorcycle routes and some of them are casualty routes, but unfortunately I haven't actually got which ones are which on here, so I do apologise for that, but I can certainly find out and let you know what those ones particularly are. Sorry. I can't remember which ones they are. I think the yellow ones might be like motorcycle routes. Oh, the motorcycle. I confirm that to you. Sorry. Yeah.
I think the other thing that Leanne covered off was we do publicise on the website these routes in advance where we're going to deploy for the coming week. So I know that's been an issue that's been raised with me. Why don't we put signs up saying, you know, why don't we put temporary signs up? Actually, the only signs that under the partnership with the local authority is where there's been where there are permanent fixed site cameras. We don't have permanent fixed site cameras, and there has been a directive from the Department of Transport about reducing signage on the side of roads generally. So that's been a directive that all highways departments have got. So they're working to that in any event. My retort generally is, actually, everybody who drives on the road should know a single carriageway road, the maximum speed you can do is 60 miles an hour, and on a dual carriageway it's 70 miles an hour. That's part of your highway code, so you shouldn't really need explaining to yourself why you should drive over that speed in the first place. And we do, of course, operate a nationally approved sort of tolerance factor. It's not tolerance as such, but it gives us, it provides a little bit of leeway for people who may err slightly. And so they wouldn't be prosecuted, but there's clearly a nationally approved process for that. And as I say, there are some clear identifications of routes which we know to be motorcycle routes linked to events. So whether it be those that run out of Helmsley, those Oliver's Mount event that, for example, at Scarborough, those issues that we know are clear concerns, are also linked not just to routes but times of day, weekends, evenings and the like. So.
Okay. And they are a mixture of KSI sites, community concern sites. I'm not quite sure which colours which are. I think the red might be KSI, thinking about it, and the yellow might be community concern, but I can let you know that.
Okay.
In order to measure the if you like, the effectiveness of the success of the operation, we're quite keen to engage academia in that, and we have done so through Newcastle University and Professor Neil Thorpe whilst we haven't actually got yet a formal response, a formal product to publish, which we will do, the information that is coming out of that evaluation is very positive. What they have been looking at is they've been undertaking research around the impact of the vans, or the vehicles, across 22 sites. And that looks back at deployments from the past 3 years, but also it looks forward from a predictive analysis perspective for the 3 years going forward. The indications are so far that in the 3 years we've currently operated that actually the vehicles have had a significant impact on the reduction of killed or seriously injured. And in fact, if we look at those figures, going back to the sort of first slide, you know, we are looking at a 9% reduction in the killed and seriously injured casualties since the introduction of the safety camera vans. Whilst, you know, as Mr Madrick has said, there's nothing to celebrate, that does give us some comfort that the activity that we are deploying through the safety camera vans is having some impact in terms of the outcomes around the police and crime plan, and obviously reducing those casualties.
If we just stop you there, Will's got a question, and then we're just going to have to be careful of time, because
Thanks.
Will.
Thanks, Chief. It's not a question actually. I was just on your point about publishing where the vans go, and Leanne's point about working with academia. The police and the Commissioner are committed to transparency on the safety camera vans, because we know people have got lots of different opinions on them. It's been through this meeting before, but there is an annual report published now for quite some time ago, 14, 15, but we are committed to doing that every year now, and information coming out your ears is in that report, so the public do have access to all this information, and albeit we go through it all now, it's all available elsewhere and online and all those things, so just pointing it out for anyone who's watching who's interested.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would reiterate though that we do have some of the roads that are most concerned in the country. We have 60-mile-an-hour rural roads, which by definition per kilometre travelled are where we're likely to see most KSIs. In respect of some of the more modern roads, the motorways, they are safer roads, they're safer in the sense that we see less casualties in relation. So we see a high proportion of those, although we significantly improved against any national comparison over the last few years, significantly.
Okay, thanks. And as if by magic, I do now have a response to the colours. So the red colours are the priority routes. So as I said before, they probably would include some of the main KSI type routes. The blue routes are the motorcycle routes, in fact. And the green and the amber are sort of less visited sites. That we, in terms of collisions or traffic flow. And the numbers against each box are just the site codes. So I don't know if that assists in any way.
Enormously, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Right. Okay, moving on then. This just gives, I won't spend too much time on this particular slide, but this is there to illustrate thus far, I suppose, give you an idea around the total number of violations that we've captured, which you'll see has increased actually in terms of the number of violations, but that is as a result of our capacity probably increasing. So don't read into that as negative. And our approach from a enforcement and educational perspective, obviously our approach here is education first. To support us in that, we implemented now for about a year road traffic offence reports since about March 2015, and that has actually replaced the endorsable and non-endorsable fixed penalties, and that means that they're still issued, if you like, at the roadside, but they're brought now into the Traffic Bureau for a decision-making process which gives them consistency and opens up the ability for us to, if you like, introduce and look at the wider educational opportunities. And as a result of that, we have been able to, you know, the safety camera vehicles and other officer activity doesn't just focus on speeding. So this seeks to illustrate that actually we do have a number of other types of courses that we divert people to within certain thresholds that were approved through obviously national thresholds that we apply. So we've got there various opportunities. So we've got the standard speed awareness courses. We've got mobile phone use, which is what's driving us, but that's also includes red light and crossing lines, so sort of antisocial use of the road really. We've also got driving for change, which is around minor distractions and non-collision or sort of error of judgments courses, and also seatbelt awareness courses, and some of those are where people have to actually physically attend a course, or they can do an online course.
Could I just reiterate, the strategic aim is not to increase that number. The strategic aim is to get people to comply with the law. So if over the long term we got compliance, that is the strategic aim of this year. At the moment, all we're seeing is because we're increasing our capacity, we are detecting more offences. You've got no more sobering evidence than in recent months where people have not failed to put seatbelts on, and we've seen tragic consequences of those alone. So and no pun intended, the complete drive of this is to make our roads safer and ultimately for less people to contravene the law. That's the aim of the course, to make it safer. I'll keep reiterating that as long as we keep going forward. Sorry, I interrupt you, Lynn.
No, that's all right. Just we also have ride courses there, which are for essentially motorcyclists, and also which isn't on the slide, but we also have driver alertness courses, which are for careless driving type courses. So essentially, this is about that it's education, diversion, and for the longer term future. Okay. Some success stories, lots of pictures there on the screen. I will quickly run through these, but actually they have been considerable, and they don't all relate to speeding, which again hopefully seeks to illustrate the sort of multi-use of the enforcement and educational activity. Okay, so we've managed to secure actually a number of convictions around. There's something on there called a jammer, and that's a piece of equipment that people can put in their car. Obviously, it's not legal. That actually drive past the vans, and it interrupts the signals, if you like, or the lasers, so it prevents the laser locking onto the vehicle. So we have actually been able to, you know, as soon as that appears, we've captured that vehicle. We know that happens at the time, and we're able to capture that vehicle, and we've taken robust action in terms of prosecuting those types of offences. So I suppose the message is jammers don't work really, because we can pick them up in terms of our technology. Okay, there's a big orange box in the middle there. That's actually a real picture of a flash that went in front of a camera van, where a 22-year-old individual threw a flare in front of one of the vans, and they were also successfully prosecuted and went to actually Crown Court actually, received a 12-month community order with 120 hours unpaid work and £500 costs. So not actually, you know, quite a significant penalty really for. So again, that's another area. Multiple high-speed convictions that we've got around rider. And vehicles, including trailers there, driving 76 miles an hour in a 40 mile an hour zone, 12:57 in a rural village on a double bend, so sort of dangerous clearly. And through our technology, we're able to effectively, it's not quite a 360, but we've got numerous abilities at different angles, from front, back, side, basically all the way around, in terms of being able to detect identification of rider identification and speeding vehicles. There have also been, as a result of, since the introduction of this capability, a number of investments that have been able to come out of that, including Community Speedwatch, which I'll come on to in the next couple of slides. But also, we've been able to use some of the levers to reinvest into a number of areas, including a number of operations that have gone towards obviously wider road policing aims. So we've had Operation Marathon, which is casualty reduction, as part of proactive policing through RPG. We've invested into that £10,000. We've invested through some of the partnership work in terms of bike safe consumables around leaflets and various sort of educational items as part of a internal sort of course that one of our internal traffic constables deliver. We've bought some data traffic loggers which help us to determine some of the community concern sites later down in terms of the speech management protocol. We've had other initiatives such as the Honest Truth Learning Driver Initiative, £7,000 into that. We've been able to employ or deploy further safety camera equipment for motorcycles, and various sort of small projects in conjunction with the 95 Alive around some of collision analysis, exhibitions to raise awareness, biker courses and road safety champions. Okay. And we also we now prosecute our own cases through court, through police-led prosecutions. We've had some considerable success doing that. Those cases that actually don't fall within the thresholds of an educational course and obviously need to go to court. And so we do that. Okay. Just time moving on. Further opportunities going forward. There's a big picture there. I probably touched upon some of this, of a rural picture, and that's obviously to illustrate that some of the future growth of the team, if you like, is going to seek and assist with our rural communities and some of the rural crime. We're able to, with the smaller vans and flexibility, which I've touched upon, further community engagement, further motorcycle work. We are also potentially looking at wider infrared technology as well, which will help us with sort of 24/7 or low light type of enforcement, along with potentially looking at the viability of average speed cameras, but that hasn't been approved yet, but on some of the main key areas such as A1 in terms of high KSI sites or S54. So there are a number of future opportunities in relation to that. Okay. Community Speedwatch, again, this has been funded through some of the investment. We've worked very closely with the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office in relation to this, and we have bought the equipment. We're in the process of engaging volunteers across the whole county, and we are expecting rollout. First rollout in July in the Richmondshire area, with further rollouts in Harrogate and Craven area, and we are ready to go. We are just waiting for the final confirmations around the communities and the participation in that. So we bought the equipment, and we, as I say, we are ready to sort of roll out. So that will be a phased rollout going forward, and that followed a 6-month pilot, and successful 6-month pilot, and there's a whole process around that. So I don't know if you want me to go into details around that in terms of speed management protocol. No, that's fine. Yeah.
Across the entire county and the city of York, because there are communities up and down this county who want to be engaged in that. So we'll do that in a phased way.
Okay. one other thing, just one more thing I will mention on that is that most forces do run about 50 schemes, but actually we intend to run about 80 schemes. So that's significantly more expanded and obviously maximises the opportunity for community engagement. Okay. Traffic management, this is my sort of last bit on the Traffic Bureau. We incorporated traffic management into the Bureau, and they look at a range of functions, including working with partners closely around engineering options, looking at signage, traffic management orders, and sort of road safety audits. And we've had some considerable work done, for example, around the Tour, when before the increase in cyclists were expected around the Tour de France. We've worked closely in partnership in relation to design and layout and approach of Dibbles Bridge, which was a significant accident, black spot for us, and we've, as a result of that, looked at parapet options and erected that. So the traffic management team you look at and they assist us in the community speed watch, the speed management protocol as well in terms of data logger management and provide us and support us with expert knowledge and opinions and work closely with partners. Don't know if there's anything more you want me to say about traffic management.
I don't think so now at the moment.
Right. Okay, right. Okay, I'm going to pass you across to Yvonne now, who's going to outline the next points on the next slide. Thanks, Yvonne.
Okay. In addition to the Traffic Bureau functions, we obviously have roads policing officers and firearms officers, and indeed every other officer that's moving around doing their daily business are actually policing the roads at the same time. We have local and national events that North Yorkshire Police participate in, and to a certain extent international events as well. There's a variety of these events under the umbrella of the National Roads Policing Calendar, and we assist with those linked to the National Police Chiefs Council priorities, European Traffic Police Networks, Department for Transport and others. We support all those campaigns where we can. We're currently in the midst of the Summer Drink Drug Drive campaign, which is Operation Attention. It launched on the 1st of June and usually it goes on for a month, for the month of June. It's been extended within North Yorkshire this year to cover the period of the Euros. So although there might not be much interest in that now, the campaign will run from the 1st of June till the 10th of July. To date, there have been in the region of 118 arrests for drink and or drug driving. 35 of those were for drug drive offences and the remainder for drink driving. The partnership agreement with the Court Service and Crown Prosecution Service has again allowed us to secure a number of court places to speed up the fast track of offenders, speeding up the justice system, and we're regularly publishing those results through the Corporate Communications Department.
What's that? Was two of the first offences convicted were the drivers got 24 and 25 month bans, which are significant in terms of the impact that would have on their. You know, we warned that it would be an impact, and it's good to see the courts supporting the officers in the prosecution cases in relation to those. So,
some of the campaigns that Leanne mentioned, the additional campaigns that we've taken on, HGV, heavy goods vehicle operations, where we've had a police officer driving a tractor unit of a heavy goods vehicle, which means that the driver and the observer in the cab are up higher, can see what's going on in HGVs, in buses, in vehicles that are higher than the cars that we're normally in. We've had some stoppers for that operation, and that was really successful. We've had Operation Target in March alongside the National Police Chief Council Motorcycle Week of Action, which was a multi-agency operation with taxi licensing, driver and vehicle licensing, vehicle examiners, councils and the like. That's been targeting the criminal use of the roads, not just roads policing offences, but anything else that we came across with regards to criminals moving around in the county. That resulted with numerous vehicles removed from the road and arrests for a large variety of different offences. Due to the Government Agency Intelligence Network, that grabbed the attention of the Home Office, who were interested in what we were doing and said that it was quite unusual to have police forces that were working with taxi licensing, so that created some interest with the Home Office. And a further similar operation is planned for September to coincide with a European road safety activity in September. The additional drug drive legislation that was introduced in March 2015, as well as the new technology, has assisted us with taking more drug drivers off the road. The new legislation now has set limits in blood for 17 different drugs, and the technology allows us to conduct saliva-based screening at the roadside. We were successful with a funding bid to the Department for Transport that saw us get 25,000 towards state-of-the-art equipment, communications, blood analysis and the like. That's resulted in a significant increase in drug drive numbers of arrest. So the year up until March 2015, there were 88 drug drive arrests, and from the 2nd of March 2015 to the 1st of March this year, there were 239 arrests for drug driving, so a significant increase in drug drivers being removed from the road due to the introduction of the new technology.
What was the previous year again?
88 and 239.
What we see is, compared to our regional partners as well, we punch well above our weight in relation to the impact we're having in terms of the pressing the button, in terms of the number of arrests we make for drug driving offences. So where we see far larger forces with more resources, we are making more drug driving. That would suggest that we're more proactive in those areas, because I don't believe we have any less drug drivers or we have any more drug drivers. I think the issue is the degree of proactivity from the group of people that Yvonne's talked about across those range of specialisms, and not just, of course, specialists, but as say response drivers. But there's an awful lot of work going on in relation to that.
I was just going to, sorry, just on a supplementary point in relation to that. It's similar, isn't it, Tim, to the point you made before around the aim should be compliance with the law, and that's about more than just enforcement. Right. And I just wonder what else we might say about, awareness raising and things of that kind.
Yes.
Yeah, there's the educational programmes in line with 95 Alive that they get heavily involved with the Road Safety Partnership in the education for drug driving as well. And the point really of the Department for Transport funding was for communications, was to publicise the new legislation, let people know that we would be enforcing it, and help with that education point prior to the rollout of utilising the funding really.
I think like many other areas of policing, there's overlaps in crime and overlaps in other areas. People have addiction issues, whether it's addiction to commit crime because they have to feed a drugs habit. There are many drivers who have an addiction to drugs and will choose to drive because they need to either continue their criminal activity or because of their social lifestyle. That is not acceptable, and there's addiction issue to drugs as well. It underpins so many different areas, but it equally underpins the safety issues of people on our roads, because we're seeing people being caught for drug drive offences in the middle of the morning, first thing in the morning, at lunchtime, and in the evening and at night. So there are clearly those issues that we need to factor into this going forward.
We contribute greatly to and share knowledge with other European countries. Also, we've co-chaired and presented at an International Police Association seminar on safety on European roads in May, with attendees from several different European countries and also one from Australia. So we're leading the way on many aspects of road safety, including motorcycle safety, of course, forensic collision investigation and body recovery techniques, just to name a few. It was so successful, we've been invited back next year. And last but not least, of course, the National Police Chief Council portfolio for motorcycling and bike safe, which Mr Madgwick leads. 1% of traffic, motorcyclists make up approximately 1% of traffic, but 20% of fatalities, which is a massive concern for us, particularly with the rural roads that we have in North Yorkshire. We have 2 National Police Chief Council weeks of action annually for motorcycling activity, one around the Easter bank holiday weekend and the other around the August bank holiday weekend. They're mainly aimed at engaging with motorcyclists, primarily before any enforcement activity, and we want them to engage with us with regards to road safety. The Bike Safe scheme is the police-led scheme for post-test motorcycle riders. The idea of that is to bridge the gap and to signpost them into advanced rider training. That consists of a classroom input and also an observed ride with a police officer or another advanced rider. And the reinvested funding, as Leanne mentioned, from the Traffic Bureau assists with bike safe and motorcycle activity. We also conduct intelligence-led patrols in conjunction with some of the safety camera vans on motorcycle-specific routes to help us with that. The National Bike Safe Show and Track Experience will be held in Rockingham on the 16th of July this year, which is a day to involve the whole family, not just motorcyclists themselves. And there's the opportunity for motorcyclists to book an observed rider outing, as well as an opportunity for those that are interested in track riding to experience that too in a controlled and safe environment. The number of bike safe workshops being offered in the North Yorkshire area over this summer, there are 20 public workshops with 6 riders on each, and 4 workshops purely for Army personnel with 10 riders on each. And in addition to that, Bike Safe are also working nationally with the Royal Air Force, and that's a programme that's being rolled out over a number of RAF bases across the country and Scotland also. And that's going to be a 3-year programme with the RAF wanting the majority of their motorcyclists to participate in the Bike Safe programme to assist them with rider safety.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you. There's just one point I'd make, and it's quite a sobering point. The reason we're doing the RAF in this county has a big military footprint. The RAF lose more personnel to motorcycle accidents than any other form of casualty they have. So again, that's the biggest risk to serving RAF personnel is motorcycle, and we will turn our attention longer term to the Army as well, although we do locally the Army issues. So when you think about the contribution we're trying to play, it's actually educating and informing the key military personnel, not just in North Yorkshire but across the country. I'll hand over. I'm conscious we're very
This is essentially on there around possible expansion of the Council Safety Camera and the various pieces. Thank you.
So I'll be fairly brief because we discussed automatic number plate recognition earlier in the meeting. I guess a couple of points to make linked to Yvonne's slide is that ANPR does feature very much in both national operations and European operations as well. So as the national ANPR lead, I'm often linked into those national and international road campaigns. More locally, not to repeat anything we discussed earlier in the meeting, we also use ANPR on a regular basis on intelligence-led operations, Operation Hawk, which tackles cross-border criminality, particularly linked to the North Yorkshire policing area. But also on a regular basis throughout the calendar year, we engage in Operation Checkpoint, including a number of other police forces in the north of England, which again we tackle cross-border criminality as well. So without over-emphasising the point, automatic number plate recognition, ANPR, is often used in both proactive and reactive criminal investigations to keep communities in North Yorkshire safe.
I'd like to re-emphasise the point. This is a team effort across all disciplines to make, to actually take criminals off the roads, but take offending drivers off the roads as well, who put other law-abiding citizens at risk because of their complete choice of ignoring the laws. That's so I think it's reiterate, and we have special constables, volunteers, other people who play their part in that, over and beyond staff and regular officers across all disciplines.
Okay, that's the end of that presentation.
Okay, I'm just very conscious of time, so we need to move on. Thank you very much for those presentations and those comments. I know there's quite a bit in there, but I think it's really important we reiterate that the investment and the progress we've made across those disciplines are important. We're always striving to make that a better level of service and improve what we do. So moving on then to issue number 7, which we're inspection activity review and other issues. If we can...
I can make this fairly brief, really. It was really in view of a number of actions that we've had on the actions log recently for this meeting, and it was just really to provide the reassurance to the board about how the inspection regime works for both external and internal inspections. I won't go through the report per se, so if anybody has any questions, happy to take them. But as I say, it was really to provide the reassurance, just to outline the mechanism by which the HMIC, which is Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary, factors into our performance and risk management across the organisation, and to feed into that robust mechanism for reporting purposes through the internal mechanisms, but then how that's overseen by an independent external body, being the Joint Independent Audit Committee as well. So as I say, it was to address a number of points that have been raised as actions more recently, and if there's any other queries, we can happily take them.
I think it's important that we recognise the support of colleagues both within organisation development and Nexus in terms of how we do that, and we join that up together to try and improve the quality of service through inspection, through making sure we pick up those issues where there are risks, there are other issues, and seamlessly that makes a better performance arena but also a better governance arena as well. So thank you for those people involved in that area of work, and we'll continue to try and develop that going forward. That was item 7, but are there any questions specifically for Maria? I think we've covered some of them as we've gone through the day, so thank you for that. To item 8, have we any questions on Twitter?
No, we haven't.
All right, okay, there you go. So that's then item 9. Any other business?
Just one issue. There were two, of course, but you've helpfully made the statement in relation to hate crime earlier in the agenda. The other one was an issue that was raised at the Police and Crime Panel, which the Commissioner attended a few days ago, and that was just in relation to concerns around telephony voice recognition and the use of that by individuals who have hearing impairment, speech impairments, other reasons why they find that difficult to use. And I just wondered if you could make a few remarks about that.
Very briefly, I know Lisa, as part of her portfolio with Jane Larkin and with Rob Bowles, Chief Inspector in the Force Control Room, are working on a 101 review plan. They will, of course, look at any aspects of issues that make the service more difficult for people to access, and have responded to direct feedback in relation to how we connect between 101 and the officers and staff across the organisation. We have recently implemented Universal Comms programme, which should dramatically improve that. Of course, when we first introduced it, there are some teething problems. Some of those might have been an explanation for that. But what we have done is we've got a review process, and if there are any aspects in relation to, from a diversity perspective as well, of course we'll pick that up specifically, and we'll be interested to know if there is best practice. I know Leicestershire have done some interesting work around access for people who've issues in relation to hearing impairment. So we'll pick those themes up, and of course we can report back on them because we were due to report back on the 101 plan in any event.
And just briefly to add to that, the piece of work that Jane's undertaking, and she's on the National Call Taking Forum, so she's got a lot of access to some of the other work that's going on and some of the forerunners, if you like, in terms of diversity issues. Her paper deals right from the very top of National 101 and research and government work on that right through to our own switchboard facilities. So it covers the whole aspect from the national perspective right down to electronic switchboards, and actually is there a halfway house here of? Some people like them because if a solicitor wants to get through to custody immediately without speaking to somebody, they know which button to press, they can get put through to the department, whereas other people actually want to speak to somebody or want a different method of contacting police. So she's doing it in its broadest sense.
The other aspect, of course, is that for those people who regularly contact the police, and some do through their partnership role or community roles, you can actually have in the collar number now for the officer, which actually removes any issue about accent or and there are other issues. That's not suitable for some, because some people it's just a one-off contact once, but for a lot of people they regularly contact the police, and actually knowing the officer's collar number is a very easy way to directly contact the individual. So we'll pick those issues up, but we will report back through that because I know the Commissioner clearly has articulated some concerns, and we're on with that as a thing. Could I just go around the room? That was the Jane. Is there any issues of any other business? Just swiftly, Mike, Leanne shakes around the room. So I think that's the conclusion of the public side of this particular meeting. So if we can close down that side now, and if there's any